Between 1929 and 1939, American families fed themselves on less than $5 a month. Not because they had more land, not because they worked harder, because they used a garden system so efficient that a single 400 square foot plot produced 90% of a family's vegetables for an entire year. That system was never taught in schools. It was never put in gardening books. And the reason is simple. A family that grows its own food on 400 square feet does not need a grocery store. Today, I am going to show you exactly how they did it. Welcome to USA Grows. The archive opens in the winter of 1932. The Great Depression had bottomed out. 1 in 4 Americans was unemployed. Banks had failed. Soup kitchens stretched blocks long. But in cities like New York, Detroit, and Youngstown, something unexpected was happening. Families were eating fresh vegetables in the dead of winter. They were putting up jars of tomatoes and beans that would last until spring, and they were doing it on plots of land smaller than a suburban bedroom. These were not farms, they were subsistence gardens, the true predecessors to the Victory Gardens of World War II. By 1932, Depression-era gardens were producing 40% of all vegetables consumed in America. Not 40% of homegrown vegetables, 40% of all vegetables, period. That is not gardening. That is a parallel food system. Now let us talk about the efficiency, because this is where the suppression becomes undeniable. The French intensive method, imported from 1890s Paris, was the secret blueprint. Deep-dug soil, double-spaded to 18 inches, loosened the earth so roots could plunge deep. Close spacing, plants placed inches apart, eliminated bare soil where weeds could germinate. Succession planting, a new crop seeded the moment another was harvested, kept every square inch in constant production. Families using this method grew 90% of their vegetables on plots as small as 400 square feet. That is 20 feet by 20 feet, the size of a 2-car garage. From that tiny patch, a family of 4 ate fresh produce year-round. Here is the economic data that should make you question everything you've been told about food production. In New York City, relief committees invested in vacant lot garden seeds. For every single dollar they spent, the gardens produced over $5 worth of fresh food, a 500% return on investment in the middle of the worst economic crisis in American history. That is not charity. That is the most efficient food production system ever documented on American soil. But the Depression gardeners did not stop at soil. They engineered microclimates. The hotbed was their secret weapon. A wooden frame, no different from a modern cold frame, was placed over a pit filled with fresh horse manure. The manure, as it decomposed, generated heat. Natural thermal energy, no electricity, no fossil fuels. The hotbed raised soil temperature by 20 to 30 degrees, extending the growing season by 3 full months in both directions. Depression families in northern states were harvesting lettuce in March and tomatoes in November, while their neighbors bought canned goods from stores. Now let me tell you about the companion planting system they perfected. The Three Sisters was not a Native American curiosity. It was a zero-input engineering system. Corn grew tall, providing a living trellis. Beans climbed the corn, fixing nitrogen into the soil from the air. Squash sprawled along the ground, its broad leaves shading out weeds and trapping moisture. 3 plants, 1 patch, 0 synthetic fertilizer, 0 irrigation beyond rainfall, 0 weeding labor. The beans fed the corn fed the beans, the squash fed them both. This is not nostalgia. This is closed-loop agriculture that modern chemical farming cannot match. The Dust Bowl years taught them another trick: drought-proof mulching. Gardeners layered deep leaf mold, straw, and even shredded newspaper over their soil, 6 inches deep. The mulch trapped every drop of moisture, preventing evaporation entirely. While commercial farms blew away, the subsistence gardens stayed green. A layer of straw was the difference between harvest and hunger. Now let's talk about preserving, because a garden that produces all at once is useless if you cannot keep the food. The Depression families mastered root cellaring. Underground dirt cellars, not refrigerators, maintained consistent temperature and humidity, 40 degrees, 80% humidity. No electricity, no moving parts. Root crops stored for 8 to 10 months. Potatoes lasted until spring. Cabbages hung from rafters. Apples came out of the cellar in April as fresh as the day they were picked. For families without a full cellar, they used clamps, a shallow pit dug into the ground, lined with straw, root crops stacked inside, then covered with more straw, then buried under a mound of dirt. The earth insulated the food from freezing. In the dead of winter, the family dug through the mound and pulled out potatoes that had never seen a freezer. 0 energy, 0 cost, infinite shelf life. Here's the part that relief workers documented but historians forgot: the mental health lift. Unemployed men and women, stripped of dignity by the Depression, found purpose in these gardens. Historical relief records state that communal plots did more than stop starvation. They radically reduced community depression and anxiety, restoring a sense of productivity, purpose, and control to people who had lost everything. A garden did not just feed the body, it fed the spirit. Now let me tell you about the industrial slag-hip farming that emerged in Rust Belt cities. In Youngstown and Detroit, families couldn't afford topsoil, so they grew on industrial waste plots. Heavy applications of wood ash from abandoned factories, combined with composted organic matter from municipal dumps, buffered and neutralized the poisoned city soils. They grew food on land that industrial agriculture had declared dead. And it worked. The sun rack dehydration system was their answer to the glass jar shortage. In low humidity regions, families built elevated wooden wire racks on top of roofs or suspended above hot kitchen wood stoves. The sun and the rising heat rapidly dried fruits and vegetables. No canning, no pressure cookers, no glass, just air and time. Dried tomatoes stored for a year. Dried apples reconstituted into pies in February. Dried beans lasted indefinitely. Here's what they didn't tell you. Every single one of these systems relied on seed saving. Depression families maintained heirloom seed libraries handed down through generations. A single tomato variety might have been in the family for 50 years. Those seeds were assets. In today's inflation-adjusted money, a family's seed bank was worth thousands of dollars, and they never had to buy seeds from a catalog, never had to depend on a supply chain, never had to ask permission to plant. The barter economies that emerged around these gardens were the final piece. Rare or high-yielding heirloom tomato seeds were used directly as currency. A packet of dense, heavy-producing slicing tomato seeds could be traded for livestock feed, shoes, or even medical care. The seed was not just food, it was wealth. So, why was this system never taught in schools? Why was it never put in gardening books? The answer is simple, brutal, and reveals everything. A family that grows 90% of their vegetables on 400 square feet does not need a grocery store, does not need a seed catalog, does not need a fertilizer company, does not need a canning equipment manufacturer. The Depression garden system was not hidden because it failed. It was hidden because it succeeded too well. The same corporations that profited from the post-war agricultural boom had no interest in teaching Americans how to feed themselves from a postage stamp of land. You can't sell hybrid seeds to someone who saves their own. You can't sell synthetic fertilizer to someone who composts. You can't sell refrigerators to someone who root cellars. You can't sell processed foods to someone who dries tomatoes on their roof. The knowledge is not lost. It's sitting in old extension bulletins from the 1930s. It's preserved in the memories of families who never stopped practicing it. And it's still waiting for the moment when Americans realize that the food system they trust is built on dependency, not resilience. You don't need 10 acres. You need 400 square feet. You don't need a greenhouse. You need a hotbed of horse manure. You don't need a freezer. You need a root cellar or a clamp. You don't need a seed
Catalog. You need one tomato that you save year after year. The Great Depression's secret garden system is not history. It is a blueprint, and it is time to bring it back. If this story opens something for you, subscribe to USA Grows and hit the bell. Every like and every share helps preserve this wisdom. The next story opens soon.